English translation 288th contact. Sunday, 23rd July 2015, 15 hours.
I am really happy to see you, and I think I know why you are here, and I cannot miss it, which of course also makes me happy.
Yes, we came here to express our thanks to you.
Without your participation, yes, we would like to thank you very much.
Just please do not make a state affair out of it. You would have done it without me, but maybe it would have taken a little longer. But may I ask, how long have you known each other?
Since the 7th of January, 1999.
I thought it had been 2 or 3 years.
No, it is only 19 months since our first encounter. But is it possible that we can talk to you privately about some things?
Of course. You and Florina, you do not want me to mention this in the contact report?
That is our opinion, yes. We do not need much time either, and we would like to have our concerns discussed before Ptah arrives here.
Ta also wants to come here?
Yes, he just recently arrived and would like to discuss some private things with you.
Florina did not tell me anything about this, but I am looking forward to his visit.
Then we can discuss our concerns now?
Of course.
Thank you. To deal immediately with the first matter?
Thank you for your comments and explanations, which are very helpful for us. Then we do not want to keep you any longer, and Tar will appear in the next few minutes. So goodbye.
Also, I would like to express my thanks to you. Please let me embrace you again.
Well then, bye everyone. Hello, my friend. Be welcome. You are here fast.
Greetings. Yes, I only waited because I did not want to disturb your conversation. That is how I got here just after Florina and Zafanat Paneach's leaving.
I was told that you also wanted to discuss personal matters with me.
That is right. Can I get right to my point?
Of course, but it would be nice if I could ask you a handful of questions afterwards.
Of course. The thing is the next things take a little longer and take a little more time. You can be sure of my sincere thanks. The whole thing has caused me a lot of trouble and worries as well as problems. Through your answers and explanations, I now see everything clearly in the whole context. I think, however, that all the facts of the questions and answers are too profound in regard to the spiritual teaching to be openly mentioned. If everything were stated, confusion and misunderstanding would be the inevitable consequence. Even the understanding of the group members has not progressed so far that it would be harmless to be able to name the facts openly. Therefore, the whole thing must really remain private.
That is what I am going to stick to, and not list our conversation in the contact report.
That would be good to do.
I think so too. Can I ask my questions now?
Of course, but I would also like to say that your explanations and answers are of enormous importance for our entire spiritual leadership, and that I also came to you with the questions on their behalf. So I have to express my most sincere thanks to you also in their name.
Yes then. Tell all these wise ones that it is an extraordinary honor for me to be allowed to explain something to them. But if we are already with the wise ones, then I would like to hear your opinion about what to think about it, that here on the earth, in politics and in the news, etc., there is sporadic talk about that certain politicians should be wise. So, for example, once there was talk of the 5 wise men who conducted any kind of negotiations and so on. And at present there is talk of the 3 wise men, or of the EU wise men, who in turn are engaged in negotiations, etc.
The entirety of the designations are absolutely ridiculous, for in the case of the so-called ones, no form of wisdom can be spoken, for they lack all the necessary prerequisites. They may be well versed in diplomatic and political relations, but wisdom has no bearing on that. So the designation falls within the realm of overall ridiculousness.
Then my next question. Could you inquire with your scribes or with the experts concerning the German language when and how the 2 words Welche and die are used?
I was able to clarify this, and I was also informed that on the Earth in the German-speaking world, especially in Switzerland, Germany, and Austria, in various relationships in verbal as well as in written communication, false premises and rules, etc. are assumed, resulting in serious errors. For example, the word Welche may only be used in the context of its use if it is preceded by something indefinite, while die must precede it by something that has a certain value.
I understand your explanation in the same way as I learned the whole thing in primary school. If, for example, one speaks of genem, genen, gener or denen, etc. in a preposition, then this means something indefinite. Therefore, in further parts of the preposition one has to speak of which, or which, all depending on if the following noun is plural or male, female, neutral, etc. But on the other hand, if the speech is about those humans, that woman, that man, that child, or those things, etc., then this means a certain prescription. Therefore, a WHO, which or that must be used as a continuation. For example, it must read it applies to those who are responsible or the whole is of that, which has set the matter in motion. But on the other hand, it means that human or the human is responsible who has acted wrongly, or only one child, or the child can act freely, that or who is given freedom, etc.
I was similarly instructed by our language experts.
You once told me, when we talked about the first powered airplane flights on Earth, that the Wright brothers' story was based on a conspiracy lie, because Orville and Wilbur Wright were not the first to fly with a powered airplane. But you did not explain anything else to me, probably because I did not ask any more. But now somebody asked me that the Wright brothers were the first to take to the air in a powered aircraft. According to your statement at that time, I said that this was not true, but I could not give any further details.
The first powered aircraft that also actually flew was built and flown by a certain Gustav Weisskopf. He was a German who emigrated to America. His motorized aircraft was indeed airworthy, as I said in my explanation, but this fact was twisted into a lie, and a transatlantic conspiracy caused the Americans through the Wright brothers to gain praise and honor. Truthfully, Gustav Weisskopf was the actual pioneer of the powered aircraft and the powered aircraft flight, but not the Wright brothers.
Then there should be something about this in the encyclopedia. Wait a minute, yes there. I read it aloud. Weisskopf, Gustav, flight pioneer. Born in Leutershausen, Franconia, Germany on Fern Point 1. 1874, died in Fairfield, Connecticut, USA on 10.10. 1927. In 1895, he emigrated to America, where he called himself Gustav Whitehead. On 14.8. 1901, he made 2 flights of 800 mailer distance with a self-built motor plane, a monoplane, which enabled him to make the first motor flight in the world. With regard to the Wright brothers, the following. One moment, yes, here. Wright, Orville American aircraft technician, born in Dayton, Ohio on 19th.8. 1871, died there on 30.1.1948, was with his brother Wilbur W. Born in 1867, died in 1912, successful inventor of the motor aircraft, on 17.12. 1903, they made the first controlled powered flights, first flight 12 seconds duration and 53 meters in distance. with a double-decker, which was moved by two propellers driven by a small petrol engine. The Wright brothers were considered the true pioneers of powered flight.
Aircraft.
The dream of flying is as old as humankind. Even the oldest legends and myths tell of attempts to soar like a bird into the vastness of the sky. One of the oldest traditions tells the story of Daedalus and Icarus. According to the legend, Daedalus and his son Icarus had been imprisoned by the cruel King Minos on the island of Crete. To escape their prison, Daedalus made wings for himself and his son out of feathers, which he bound together with wax. The attempt succeeded, but Icarus, full of cockiness and blind to the danger, soared too high. The sun melted the wax of the wings, and Icarus fell to his death.
The flight of Icarus.
Many of the attempts to do the same as Daedalus and Icarus came to a similarly tragic end. Only advances in the natural sciences made it possible to build functioning flying machines. The first historically verified successful aviation took place barely more than 200 years ago, on the 21st of November, 1783. Based on the idea that a flying apparatus should be lighter than air, the Montgolfier brothers had constructed a hot air balloon and demonstrated its flying qualities with a sheep, a duck, and a rooster as passengers. Remarkably, however, they did not undertake the first flight themselves, but left the fame to two young noblemen. After that, it was to take almost another 100 years before a human being with artificial wings was finally able to take off from the ground. The work of Otto Lilienthal was of outstanding importance. As a member of an expert commission, commissioned by the military to investigate the possibility of guided flight with a heavier-than-air flying machine, he had to realize that flying by muscle power alone was impossible. Engines had been available for some time, but they were far too weak. So Lilienthal's only option was to glide. During his first attempts in 1891, he already managed jumps of 6 to 7 meters. By perfecting his gliders and increasing the jump height, he was finally able to increase the flight distance to 250 meters and perform elementary flight maneuvers.
The hot air balloon by the brothers Montgolfier from 1783.
Lilienthal's experiments caused a great sensation. At a price of 500 DM, the gliders even found a number of buyers. But his end was as tragic as that of Icarus. On the 9th of August, 1896, a gust of wind caught him. Lilienthal lost control of his flying apparatus and crashed. A day later, he succumbed to his injuries. His last words, "Sacrifices must be made," were to remain true for many aviation pioneers.
Otto Lilienthal, 1848-1896.
Lilienthal had shown that flying apparatus heavier than air were possible in principle. However, he had not progressed beyond propulsionless gliding flight. According to today's knowledge, the fame of the first powered flight belongs to Gustav Weisskopf from Leutershausen. On the 14th of April, 1901, he succeeded in covering a distance of about 2 kilometers with a self-built flying machine. His flying apparatus was recently reconstructed and is currently being flown at the German Armed Forces Testing Center for Aircraft in Manching. Weisskopf tried to improve his flying apparatus with self-built engines, which he also partially succeeded in doing. But only a short time later, the Wright brothers undertook their successful flight experiments to great public interest, and Gustav Weisskopf was forgotten. Inspired by Lilienthal's experiments, Wilbur and Orville Wright began building a flying machine in 1899. They maintained their manual skills by building and repairing bicycles. After a good 4 years of hard work, Orville Wright was able to take off on his first flight in an engine-powered aircraft on the 17th of December, 1903. The first flights lasted barely more than a minute, but in principle the breakthrough had been made. The dream of flying had become reality. A short time later, the Wright brothers went to Europe to present their flying apparatus to a broad public and to make flying popular in this manner. This circumstance in particular has contributed to the fact that the beginnings of powered flight are primarily associated with the Wright brothers. Not least because of its enormous military significance, aircraft construction experienced rapid development in the following years. The exhibits on display at the Technik Museum Speyer provide impressive proof of this. The following pages are dedicated to them.
Otto Lilienthal, on occasion of one of his first flight experiments near Berlin.
This pioneering act, however, is not due to the Wright brothers, and thus in no wise to the Americans, but to the German Gustav Weisskopf, alias Gustav Whitehead. But as with many things, the Americans like to adorn themselves with laurels that they are not entitled to, as is the case in this case.
But how do you want to prove that?
That is not going to be easy, unfortunately.
You are well versed in earthly literature, so do you know the books The Invented Middle Ages and Who Turned the Clock? These are works by a certain Heribert Illig.
These nonsense books are known to me.
Aha, that is what I wanted to know, just what you think about it.
It is a senseless scribble of absolute nonsense without equal.
Thanks for the clarification. Many claim that there are gemstone therapies for healing diseases and other health complaints of all kinds, whereby the gemstones or minerals, etc., are to be placed in certain symmetrical forms on the various body parts, or worn as jewelry or talisman, etc., on the body. Water should have the same or similar healing effects if precious stones have been lying in it for a long time. What is to be made of it? In my opinion, as I was taught, this is sheer nonsense, because gemstones and minerals or metals, etc., are, as far as I know, only effective in healing if they are ground like powder and mixed with other medical active substances, and thus taken or applied as salves or pastes, etc., on wounds or painful places, etc. At least that is how I was taught by you and by my teachers, the Indian sages.
There is actually nothing more to say about this, because you have already explained the facts clearly and unambiguously.
Then another question. Do you know how much fresh water there is on Earth that can be used by humans, plants, and animals?
It is just 0.3% of all water on Earth. But this is also known to earthly scientists.
It was just a question to me that I could not answer. Another question that was addressed to me, and that I could not answer, relates to the Earth's magnetic field. Namely, how often this changes polarity over time, and whether one can assume an average value over time. You also deal with geology and embossing, etc., so you can answer the question for sure, yes?
That is correct, but over what period of time should I give details?
I was asked about the last 10 million years.
During this time, the polarity reversal process of the Earth's magnetic field was repeated 50 times, on average every 200,000 years.
Then I have another question that relates to hygiene, namely the cleaning of the excrement excretion area. How do you handle this? I remember that on the great journey I did not have to use paper or similar materials or water in this respect, but that everything was done in a pleasantly different way. Here on Earth, paper or water is used. With water, there is not only the hand way that is common in Arabia, for example, but in the so-called industrialized countries there is also the so-called closomat bidet, which is an invention of Eva's father and uncle. Hot water is used for cleaning with a sprayer or a spray arm, and the whole thing is dried with hot air afterwards.
The whole thing is extremely unhygienic, the way it is still handled on Earth. The use of paper and the like can still be described as the best remedy besides the pure handy use of water, although both are also quite unhygienic methods which, however, do not show much danger. However, this cannot be said about the use of cloths. These are extremely unhygienic, although manufacturers and users claim the opposite. In reality, this technique poses a great risk of pathogens because dangerous pathogenic bacteria are attached to the spray heads. This means that every person who uses this cleaning method will be infected by the deposited bacteria of previous users and will be exposed to the risk of communicable diseases. In particular, the following bacteria should be mentioned, which can cause inflammations and diseases, etc. Enterococci, Colibacteria, Enterobacter, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, and Staphylococci.
All kinds of things. But how does the purification method that you use work, or what is it based on?
The cleaning is carried out by high-frequency vibrations, which also have a disinfecting function and effect. Cleaning alone is not enough in the area you mention, which is why it is necessary to disinfect it properly. This would also be necessary for the Earth humans when they go to the bathroom, because without such disinfection, the necessary hygiene is not guaranteed, and consequently there is always the danger that pathogens can be transmitted or spread in some manner. Even with the cloths technique, it is essential that the spray heads, the toilet, and the associated equipment are disinfected after each use.
The earthly technique and the understanding of hygiene as well as the knowledge of medicine, etc., are not yet there. Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, this really has to be said.
Something little is done, because there are so-called wet wipes, which have a disinfecting and better cleaning effect. But this should not be the end of what is necessary for proper hygiene.
In this area, much still needs to be done with the Earth humans, whereby it is regrettable that more is not done in this regard, or as a rule, the wrong thing. This is especially important because hygiene in the form mentioned is particularly important. Because the excrement excretion part, as you say, is to a large extent a focal point for pathogens that can be transmitted to other human beings in various manners or can affect one's own person. But this is still largely unknown to earthly physicians and hygienists.
Again, unfortunately. Well, with that, I actually asked all the questions.
Then I would like to express my deep thanks to you for your helpful efforts which you have given to Florina and Zaphanat-Paneach.
They could also have knocked on your door, I think. You would certainly have acted likewise.
That is correct. But you must remember that we are also human beings who make friends according to our own standards, as is the case with the Earth humans and everywhere else. Feelings play an important role as well as trust and reverence and respect.
Values that Florina and Zaphanat-Paneach certainly have in store for you.
This is undeniable. But there is always a certain something that, for some reason, makes human beings feel more attracted to other persons in relation to certain things than to those with whom they are in closest contact. This is also a good thing, because otherwise a relationship could arise that inevitably leads to a lack of freedom, because a compelling connection would arise.
Which, of course, you are right about. I also think in this manner myself. But I found it extraordinary that I, as a terrestrial guy, in their search for advice, was taken by both into their confidence and made privy to their most personal feelings.
If I were you, I would not be surprised, my friend. If I were in the same position as Zaphanat-Paneach and Florina, then I would also choose you as my advisor and mediator.
Aha, and why then?
I think that you yourself will find the solution to the mystery. But now I have something else I want to talk to you about, which has just occurred to me, which is of a purely private nature. If you still have time.
Of course, just get started.